All right, so we are back. We are covering again, we're going through a XUI setup and install of a GitHub management XUI. So we're going to just go ahead and dive right back in. This is video 3 of the series. Let's go ahead and, so I was looking at the GitHub API docs a little bit this morning. I noticed a couple of things about their API without that I wasn't told yesterday when I was kind of looking into some of these things. So hang on just a second. Screen numbers are still showing up and it's going to bug me. So anyway, I think we're still on correct screen. Yes, we are. All right. So a couple of things I want to do is number one, their API. I think this is a recent add, is the ability to version their API. So any breaking changes after 2022, November 28, is going to be added as part of another API version. So I want to make sure that we are versioning these APIs. Should help to prevent with any kind of breakage down the road. So API versions, one of the things show here. To do that, it's a header that ends up getting passed in. So what I'm going to do is just copy this header. And here's a really cool thing. Once we've created this class in CloudBolt, we have our GitHub wrapper class here. We have our headers here. So what I'm going to do is just knock this down a line. And then the next thing I'm going to do is just paste what we copied from there. That doesn't look right, but we'll fix that. And I think it's just ends up being no spaces. We will verify in just a minute here. Okay, let's see. We forgot a comma. There we go. So these should, what we've done is we've expanded our headers to include the version header. The other thing I started looking into, I am using a personal access token. Probably isn't the best way to approach this for a production type environment. But the more I went down that rabbit hole, the less I understood. So versus trying to figure that out, I'm going to move forward in these videos, and maybe at some point in the future, I will come back and update this to use something that's more of an enterprise grade type authentication mechanism versus a personal access token. That would allow us, effectively, this being run from CloudBolt probably should be run with some kind of service account or some application type account that has access to write and read the repos that we're targeting from CloudBolt. So, but again, that'll be future capability, going to continue to leverage the personal access token for now. So we've added in our new header. On the last call, we went through and did the Git repos. The other request that I had or the other thought I had as I was kind of thinking through these things, first of all, I want to figure out why, reformat the file. Okay, so Python likes single space when there are methods on a class, but double spaces between functions in the document. So anyway, so I have the GitHub repos class here. I don't know if I need that anymore, but I'm going to leave it for now. Okay, let's go ahead. Let's take a look. We're gonna go down. We have our Git repos method now on our class. I do want to update the request class though. I forgot that I usually like to do something a little more than what we did here. So we're going to start to expand this a little bit. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to allow the user of this method to pass in a method. So in this case, it's going to be get, post, those types of methods. So we're going to treat maybe gets a little differently than others. You'll notice here that we have request.get. So I'm going to add an additional input parameter to my method here. I'm going to default it to get, which I do a lot of get calls. So a lot of times if I'm just doing request, I'm not even going to pass in a method. It's just going to automatically default to get. So I don't have to update any of my existing calls of this function like this self.request. I'm not going to have to tell it get because that's the default mechanism. But when I start looking at posts or patches or any other kind of write mechanisms, I will have to go through and pass that in just kind of like this. So, yeah. Okay, so we have our request, our URL. I do have some examples of this elsewhere that I'm just trying to think through best way to handle this. Okay, so sorry, apologies, I had to go track this down. So I'm looking back at my NSX XUI and I'm remembering what I did here. Effectively, I have an underscore request method here, and there's a couple of things that allow me to pass multiple different things into here. I'm then constructing the headers inside of here. And the reason that I'm doing that, as opposed to setting it on the base class, is that this allows me to change maybe the content type that we're using to pass into the REST call. So I do think I want to do that. That allows me to default to a content type like application JSON. But if we need to pass a different content type for different calls, sometimes posts, if we're writing files, we may have a different content type that we're passing through. So I'm going to just basically kind of, I think, copy a lot of this. I don't think this is, let me just double check, where are we at? Don't need fun templates anymore. So my utilities method. My headers so far, I don't have a content type. So I am going to do application JSON. I'm just going to reference the documentation for GitHub again real quick. Let's see. So this is a GitHub REST API. I do want to go through and look at repositories and see maybe like list repositories and just kind of see what they're suggesting versus we could list organization repositories or list user repositories is I think the method that we went with earlier. But listing repositories for a user might be different than listing repositories for an organization. So we'll go through and maybe take a look at both of these. So let's go ahead and say parameters for list repositories for a user. So let's look at an example here. So they are passing in, they're not passing in any content type. I'm going to leave that. Notice the authorization, and I think bearer or token work here. Either way, I think bearer, yeah, either of those work. That again, we added in this X GitHub API version as an additional header, so that will be getting passed in as well. The accept header here, are we including that already? I'm not entirely sure what we would want to do with this. So we may just leave that out for now. Maybe we'll come back to that later. But the two, I think, important headers would be these two. And we're going to just verify that this is still functioning after we update this. But we have our self.headers. Again, I don't know that I want to do the headers here. I'm probably going to shift those down. So let's do... I do want to set, though, on the base class itself, I do want to set the GitHub API version. I'm going to set that in something equal to this. And then what I'll do is I'll just reference that inside of my API, my headers as I construct those. So I'm gonna pull this out. I'm gonna come down to start constructing the headers. Okay, so again, we're going to pull in the self.token. We are passing the model in, or the class in as part of the self call. This should construct our headers just fine. Nope, I don't want to do self.headers. I just want to do headers. And then instead of calling self.headers here, I'm just going to pass in the header because they're being called here directly inside of our method. So again, I'm going to jump back over to the NSX one. This is also a little bit different. Notice this is an underscore request, and part of what we're doing here is instead of you passing in the method, we've created other wrapper methods for the ones that are required. So post, patch, put, get, delete, those kinds of things. And that allows us to handle each of those methods a little differently. In this case, it's just really quick and simple. You know, we're just usually a one line return that tells it that we're going to get, put, patch, all of those kinds of things. So I do like that mechanism a little better. So we're going to add the additional things in here. Knock this down a line. So I do like the URL outside of the method. I'm going to start with URL and then method. So we're good up to there. I do not have any data yet, but data would be the payload we're trying to pass in via JSON. I'll let this out spaces in there. There shouldn't be spaces there. It's strange that it's doing that. Anyway, okay, so we are moving on. So we have our headers. We don't need a cookie. I don't know if we need content type or not. So I'm going to leave that. I'm going to leave that out for now. We can always add that back in later, but we did need the data component here. Back over to utilities. I already have my request URL being built here and constructed. Just for uniformity's sake, I'm going to shift that below my headers. And then we head back over here, my response. Thank you, GitHub Copilot. So JSON equals data. You know, the other thing I'm going to do is I do the verify. This allows me to disable SSL checking globally. So a lot of times if you're working with no, this shouldn't matter for GitHub, but I'm going to add it in there anyway. So I'm going to add in my verify. And at this point, I'm going to start to format this a little differently. Instead of just request.get, we're going to do request.request. Start with our method. Then we need our URL, JSON headers, verify. And we can do proxies as well. That would allow us, if there's a proxy set for the system, that would allow us to consume that proxy. So that would work. Let's go ahead and look at it. So now we need to set up the why is this putting spaces when I paste? Hang on just a second. I'm going to pause and look that up because it's driving me crazy. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and set up my verify and proxies here on the class itself. I like to set this on the class because this gives me then a switch to at one place say exactly, you know, I can set my variables for this in one place, or I can pull them from somewhere else and it gives me like one switch to update very quickly. So proxies is something that we have in CloudBolt. If there's a proxy set up for the server, so we want to pull proxies from CloudBolt itself. So let's look for prox. Self.proxies is not something that's exposed. I don't have time to track that down, but you know that might be a good future at some point if you're leveraging a proxy. I'm going to pull that out for now though. Okay, but we have our verify set up. So again, we can remove proxies from here. We now have our requests set up, and we can go to in content type. I don't know that that's going to matter, so we're going to leave this portion out here. I don't know that I care a ton Response codes, I'm already checking the response with that raise for error method that we were looking at before. Token and cookie, I don't know that we need to store anything here, but maybe we'll leave that to update. So I think we're good here. We now have our base request method. I'm actually going to flip this to underscore request. And then from underscore request, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a couple of other classes that call this, or a couple of other methods that call this. So I'm going to do def get. And we're just going to pass in the URL for get now. So I can just call this. It's going to call the request method and pass that URL directly. Again, the method is going to end up being get. But what we can do is we can also build this out. I know I'm going to eventually need a post. Notice GitHub Copilot is really handy here. I just hit tab. It's filling all of this out, and it's doing almost exactly what I was going to end up typing out anyway. So, and then we can do a put. I don't know what the GitHub APIs look like, but just in case there are any puts, and then def, yeah, delete. I think we'll probably want to delete as well. We may want to delete existing files before we commit new ones. We'll have to work through those processes. So now we have a number of different methods that we've created here. We need to go back to our original method and test to make sure this works. But we have this, remember, get repos. We have our URL. We have, instead of self.request, we're going to do self.get now. We're going to save this file. And then we're going to launch shell plus. Again, this is an alias that points at the actual shell plus file. Just opt/CloudBolt/manage.py space shell underscore plus. Okay, so we are now into our method. So I'm going to do my from. I'm going to go ahead and import my GitHub wrapper. And then I'm going to get my connection info that we stored. I'm going to make sure it's still the right connection info. And then I'm going to launch my GitHub wrapper class. So GitHub equals, and this is all just me hitting the up arrow and pulling from what I had before. And then we need GitHub. Let's do repos. GitHub.get repos. GitHub wrapper has no attribute for .request. That was the problem. So even though GitHub Copilot told me that that was the right method, it didn't even read the file correctly. So got me real close. I think the rest of it we're good here now. Actually, I think I changed the method name after I did all of that, so that might be on me. Import GitHub, and then we will do our call repos equals. There we go. Now let's do our for loop just to print out the names. There we go. Okay, got a couple of repos in there. So we're seeing that we're getting repos returned. Now, the other thing that I noticed going through the GitHub API this morning is that when we look at repositories, there's two different calls. One's for an organization repository, one's for a user repository. So this would allow, and depending on who wants to use this, they may want to leverage organization repositories. They may want to leverage user repositories. So this gives us a little freedom in choosing what we're going to allow that there. So wondering, don't know if this is going to work, but why don't we do this? So organization repository is orgs/org/repos. I don't think my access token is authorized to access our org, and that might be where the issue comes in here. I think I need a different type of token to access the CloudBolt org. So I'm not sure that I would be able to test with this right now. I may shift to that later, but I'm going to focus on the user repos for now, but really what I would do is maybe at some point add this in to say, what kind of repo are you trying to pull from? An organizational repo? Or are you trying to pull from a user repo? And then if an organizational repo, we will go through and do the list the organizational repos, but if user, we would list the user repos because it's slightly different for what the API call looks like here. So, okay, so continue to stick with user repos. We have our method set up. So we have our get repos function functioning, just continuing to build out our class here. I'm going to actually shift my get repos down a little further. I'm going to leave all of my REST stuff at the top. And then I don't know if it necessarily matters, but this gives me a little space after everything. The next thing I'm going to do is I need to get branches from a repo. I don't know. Let's see if we go to repo, first repo, repos, first repo. I'm looking for probably a URL is probably what we want to go for. Let's check. Let's go top and start there. It's the repo name. Here's my repo full name. Let's go to, actually, let's see what the GitHub API is specifying here. So list repository teams, languages, we want to say branches. Content, links, tags. It's its own API. Let's see, branches. List branches. Okay, so list branches. And this is taking in owner repo branches. So we are passing in the URL for so I may take the full name here because we know the beginning here. We'll pass in the full name and then we need to add the branches to the end. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and specify, once we have our repos, we need to specify a specific repo full name. I'm actually going to do full name of the repo. And I like to put examples in my documentation because there we go. Username / repo. I think that's descriptive enough. So now we have our URL here, and it's GitHub built this out a little bit. Actually, instead of get branches for repositories, branches for repositories. I almost think. URL. I'm still reading the wrong thing. So, but that's okay. Let's go back over to our API. So again, it is repos. So it was correct. I thought it was repository spelled out. So repos and then slash our full name, which would be owner / repo, and then branches. So we have, this is exactly what we want to see. I don't think we need a trailing slash. Some APIs are a little specific about that. No trailing slash. So this should now get us our branches as long as we're passing in the repo full name. So let's go ahead and save all. We're going to go ahead and exit out of Shell Plus. We're going to relaunch Shell Plus because we changed our file. All right, so we're going to go do our imports first. Get our connection info. Actually, the other thing that I thought of, now that we're looking through this, before we get much further down this road, is instead of passing in a connection info, I also like to get a connection info by name. So I'm going to change this a little bit to do connection con info name. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do connection info.objects.get. And then we're going to do name equals con info name. So this is going to be a little bit different. We're going to put this above the password because now that we're not passing con info anymore, we're going to have to get the con info first. So self.conInfo equals that, and then we're going to do self.token equals self.conInfo.password. So there we go. So a little bit of restructuring. Now we don't have to go out and get the object. All we need to do is tell it the name of the GitHub connection info that we want to use. In my instance, that's github.com is what I had called it. So again, just make sure I save all, cancel out of Shell Plus, go back into Shell Plus. Wait for it to launch. Okay, now that we're back in, we're going to redo our import. Let's do CI underscore name equals github.com. And then what we'll do is GitHub equals, and then instead of CI, we'll do CI underscore name. And it should do the trick now. Let's do GitHub. We should be able to do github.conInfo now and make sure we have the correct one. There we go. So now we're using the name to get the correct authentication mechanism, the correct connection info. So we now can go in and do GitHub. I'm trying to do get branches for repositories. Get branches for repositories, and then we need the name, full name of a repository. And I think, if I recall correctly, remember which ones. Expose. There we go. Let's do bubble samples. Works. And let's see. Well, we got a result, so that's a start. We got names for each of these branches. I don't have a ton, main, map input, and test. So they're all 3 different branches, but what we'll do is we'll just say branches equals, and then for branch, and then branches. All right, there we go. Now we're printing out our branches. So we're able to get to our branches. This way we can get to, if we need the SHA hash for a branch or just the name for a branch as we're moving forward, we're now able to get branches for repositories. A couple of other things. While we're here, we may as well just build out a couple of things that I think we'll need as we get in here. The next thing I want to take a look at is, might be commits, it may also be files or something along those lines, but I think it's probably commits. Okay, this commits, I don't need to list, I don't need to get, I don't need to compare. This branches for head commit, no. Repository contents, no. Create or update file contents. I think that may be where we're at. I'm wondering what the response schema looks like if that returns a commit. Okay, so it looks like there's a commit associated with a file, right? Yeah, so it looks like this is probably a file commit, but let's look at this in a little more detail. So this is a commit. So create or update file contents would be the commit. do want to make sure the path. Okay, so we reference, we get to it from the repository, so we need the repository full name again. We're going to need the path. So create or update file contents. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and say, just name it exactly the same. Why not? Hey, look at that. So GitHub Autopilot, it's extremely helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and knock this down a little bit, just so that we're formatted correctly. Repo, path of the file, commit message, content of the file, the branch to commit to. So we're going to build out our repo. So remember what we saw here, our repo full name, we're going to pass in. We're going to then go to contents, and then we're going to write to the path that was specified here. And the path ends up being the file path all the way down to the file. So it looks like this would end up being, this would be a per file commit, which I think is okay, especially you don't want to write to like your main branch or anything like that. But as long as you're using an appropriate branching strategy, that should be fine. Message, this could be something maybe for message. We set a default. So I like setting defaults. But if we're setting a default, it can't be. I'm going to shift the order around here a little bit. So we're going to start with content, and then message. We're going to do a default message here, and this would prevent us from having to put in a message. As I do that, now I'm going to do this. There we go. So these are our inputs now. We're going to pass in the repo full name, path, content. We have a default message. We do always want to take in the repo full name and the path and the content, because we're always going to be creating or updating file contents. So, so this is interesting. Just make sure. So we are using our put method, and I think that is the correct one. So this is, yep, it's a put. We may need the header here, so I'm going to double check that. I'm going to try it without it first, and if it doesn't work, I'm going to go ahead and give it a shot with that. So, okay, make sure committers required, the authenticated user. So I think that's all right. We'll leverage the authenticated user right now. If we change our authentication mechanism, this may need to change, but I think that's all right for now. I wonder. Because in CloudBolt, we have their name and their email. I bet we can pass in the committer as well. I'm gonna hold that in. I'm gonna see, we might have to change this down the road, but I think we can do that. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna pull in I believe it's a user profile. So maybe the user object might have it too. So. Actually, I can just do username equals. There we go. So we now have our user. And we can do user.email. I don't remember if it sits here or not. So we have our email, and then we have user.first name, user.last name. I wonder if we have a full name. I don't know. But anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take in the user here as well, the CloudBolt user. And if it's passed in, I'm going to allow them to not pass it in if they don't want to. But if they pass in the user, basically what I will do is if user, I don't know that I want it to be author. If author's okay. Committer, can the committer be different? Let's find out. Committer could be different. We'll see. Geez. Yes, we are good. Okay, so if the user, we want to add this committer into the data for the call. So self.put URL data, is that all that we need? Pass into our put method. Yes, URL and data. So I think that we're good to go here. So why don't we do, let's save this. Exit out, relaunch Shell Plus, and go into sidebar, wait for that to launch. I am going to use my CloudBolt samples repo. I am just going to use the main branch, not. Branch equals main, so notice that that's also a default, so I didn't pick up on that before. Probably don't want to commit to main. I don't care for my personal repo, but you have the freedom to pass this in. It will default to main, but doesn't have to. So. The other item I'm going to have to launch back into Shell Plus, because what I didn't do is build out my committer object user. Now that I want it to be username, I think based off of the examples that we were seeing, that the committer object kind of looks like you get a name and an email, but the name is typically first last. So I'm going to build that out a little differently. We're going to make this an F string. It allows us to just call this right in the string, user.first underscore name, user.last underscore name. So that gets us what we need. User.email we know also works. So we have that information. This will create our committer object. That object then it gets put into the committer piece right there. So let's save all. We're going to relaunch Shell Plus. All right. Let's see. Okay, so we have that in there. So we need to do our imports. We need to import this new method. So our creator update file contents. Actually, we don't need to because we're just importing class. Equals. So now have our GitHub. And we need to do the creator update file contents. But I want to type out repo full equals. Or samples or hyphen underscore samples. The full name. Let's do path equals. I'll just, you know what, I do want to write a new folder, so I'll do, call it test commit or something like that. And then I'll create a file called .py. And then I will my content. Not entirely sure what they're looking for here, but let's I'm going to try a string. It may fail. Let's do print. Content branch I'm going to leave as main. User I'm going to get myself. So user equals me. That way we're going to try our commit and make sure that that works. And then we're going to do create update file contents, and we're going to pass in the full name, path, content, user. Processable entity. So instead of so path, we don't need the addition the leading slash. So again, I like to put examples here when needed. It's not, I will forget that. So let's start with the path because I can see that that's already incorrect. And try it again. Okay, I can only imagine that this has to do, now that we see that the path is correct that it's printing out, I think that this now likely has to do with processable entity. I'm wondering if that has to do with the content that we're passing in. I don't know if that needs to be a file or what. So let's go back over our API doc. So our API doc, creator update file contents, and we need to look at the content string, new file, using base 64 encoding. So we need to encode this with base 64. So Python encode decoding base 64 strings. Here. Okay. See if this works. So why you need to encode bytes and then string. Interesting. I don't know, but I've used this before. You need to import base 64. So bytes, content here, getting our content bytes. Then we're going to pass this in as base 64 contents file. Save all. Interesting. We didn't reload any of this, so part of the fun here. Okay, so let's go back to all our variables. Give them another shot. Unprocessable for entity, giving us let's try our header. So the last thing that I can think this might be is our header here. So let's go ahead and add this in. Let's see what happens. Very interesting. So I'm going to actually pause the video and troubleshoot this for a minute and see if we can figure out what's going on here. And that way you're not sitting here watching for a long period of time. So be back. Well, that was easier than expected. It turns out I just had that additional / in my path still. As soon as I fix that, it's coming back now. So we can see our response. Actually, the response is just going to be the JSON. So this is all of the information about the commit that was made. The next thing I do want to do is figure out if there's a way to group multiple, probably take the shot or something along those lines. But notice it did pass in the author and the committer, both as myself. I'm also using my token. I'm assuming this would work for others, but since we passed in the committer, it's pulling that information. I think actually my GitHub account might not be using my CloudBolt address. So I think that that did function, but we can go back and see information about that. Here's our message, all of those getting passed in. Now, the last thing we should be able to do is go over to this repo, and we should see a new directory called test, commit, and then hello world. So we can see our hello world.py. Here's our very simple script. So we see that the commit's working. I'm good with that. That means that this is now functioning. So we now have a functioning create or update file content. So this would allow us to create or update file contents. The next thing that I think we would need to do is, as we go through a CloudBolt file structure, we probably want to be able to, if something's no longer existing as part of a blueprint, we probably want to get rid of those files as well. That would keep the GitHub repo up to sync with everything that we're doing inside of the CloudBolt system. But maybe what we'll do is part of the UI experience for the end user. We'll warn them, say, hey, these files do no longer exist. Are you sure that you want to delete them from GitHub prior to doing this? So we'll probably do some kind of compare between this and the file structure there, but let's go ahead and do, so again, we're going to look at a delete function. So let's say delete a file. This is somewhat straightforward, it appears. But we now have contents path. We just pass that in with the delete method. So that's pretty straightforward, but let's do def, what is it? Let's do delete a file, I believe. Yeah. Delete file. Let's take their suggestion. Let's try delete file contents. See what they say to do. So we need our repo full name. We need our path. We don't necessarily, you know what? I think that there end up being a commit here. There probably is. So I think we probably need a lot of the same information here. Yeah, so we do have a message. We could update this. We have the committer. So a lot of the same information, still looking for the branch, those kinds of things here. If there's anything else additional that we would need, I think this is pretty straightforward, probably almost identical. So instead of delete file contents, whether create or update file contents, delete file contents, I think more accurately, this should be delete file, because it's going to delete the files that are the file that's specified. So delete file by CloudBolt Git Management GUI. I'm good with that. Let's see. Need all of this. I did get rid of the, just remove something. Oh, yeah, just change the name of it. That. So let's repo full name, contents, and then path as well. So I think that that's accurate, but just to verify. So path, yep, we're good there. We're still going to do, if the committer is passed in, then we'll use it. If not, we're just going to use the service account. This allows us to pass in a user if we want to, but we don't have to if we don't want to. So perfect. I think we are good here. So we're just going to kind of do the same thing. We're going to go through and delete that file now that we've verified that we can create it. Get rid of that slash. Really, all we want to do here is get rid of the .py file. The other thing, I guess we could also clean up the directory. I don't like leaving that hang out there, but it gets funny with directories sometimes too. So we'll see. So we have our path. we don't need content here. Hopefully we're not passing that in yet. So we don't need content, but we do need a user. There we go. So let's do delete file. We have our repo full name, we have our path, we have our content, we have our user. Repo full name, path. We don't need content, we just need the user. There we go. Let's give it a shot. Delete takes 2 positional arguments, but 3 were given. We don't need data. We just need the URL. I got rid of that and then just put it back in because I did Control Z on the wrong screen. So I'm going to save all and relaunch. All right, so we're back in. Okay, unprocessable for entity. Last time we got that. Samples, contents, test commit, hello.py. Let's just be sure that that file is the right one we want to be targeting. Hello world, test commit, hello world.py. That is the correct file. Why does it not like our error? The other thing I'm going to do while we're here is sometimes what ends up happening with the error handling as we're doing REST calls is it doesn't give us the full error. So I want to go through and make sure that we're getting all of the background here. It's giving us a stack trace, which is good. But I kind of want to make sure that there's not any other message that's getting passed here. So I'm going to kind of manually walk through this. And if I find out that it is giving us more information, we'll make sure that we pass that back in the error handling so that the end users are seeing that. So we're going to build our URL, build out our data. Message. Branch is this. So there's our data. And then message my space and let's go. Now we have data has our committer included in there. So we have all the information you should need. Now, if we go, we're going to not do the self.delete. We're going right to the request module. URL method data none. I'm going to set my headers. And I know that all of this is already stored. If it's a self dot, it's on my GitHub object. So I'm just going to reference that. And I'm going to recycle this token so you won't ever be able to use it. So we had that was all filled in correctly. Then let's go ahead and have a URL yet. We'll find out in a second here. GitHub. There we go. That should be the correct URL. So now we're just going to bake this down to the request method itself. We're going to have to swap out that self.verify with GitHub.verify. Import request first. All the things are walking through this manually. Method is not defined now. So method, we need to tell it that this is going to be a post or a delete. There we go. Now we have our request. So our response is a 422, but if we get into the request, again, the shell plus is super handy for these kinds of things. We can really step through this stuff, but we can do request dot. We don't need raise for status, but maybe text invalid request. SHA wasn't supplied. So I don't know if the SHA has to do, and we want to make sure that this is getting captured, the text here, and being included as part of this raise for status. So we'll do a raise for status here. And if that happens, we'll actually print something else out to the log that gives us more information about this. Because I mean, that you can see that the issue here, we can track this down. We can do much with just the generic error of, what was it even? It wasn't helpful. There we go. Unprocessable entity. That doesn't help anybody. Let's see if we can get any more information out of this. So that's been fixed. We now want so that's kind of cool to give you the documentation URL here. I think the message is really what we're trying to capture, though. So we'll put some additional error handling in here to do this. But we have our raise for status here. So we're going to put this inside of a try block. Is that an HTTP error exception? HTTP error. So HTTP error exception. So thanks again, GitHub Copilot. Actually, I need to catch this. Let's see if this works. So we're gonna do try r.raise for status. This works. Should get the test equals E. I'm just storing this, see if we can catch that exception. So now we have test bar. There's our error. So we have test bar dot string error. No, it's not going to be there. Of course, it's too easy. Not response. E. So here we can get to E. Using, yeah, unprocessable entity is not helpful. We want the JSON that we want message. Let's do we can also add some, since this is a XUI, we can add some additional logging here. When we start to use this in the context of other things, we want to actually include logging here inside of the XUI. So one of the things that I'll do here is use the thread logger imports for CloudBolt. Let's see if we have it in here. We don't. I know one fuse. But if we grab just that import for, we need thread logger, we don't need job or any of that. The progress wouldn't apply in this situation. So let's go back over to utilities. We're going to, so I'm going to leave print in here because we are debugging. We can always remove that later. That's really not going to do a ton if this is running in the system, but I am going to import my thread logger top so that I can do logging inside of here anywhere that I want. Okay, so now we have a logger that we can work with, and now what I can do is I can do actually, I don't think I need to print if I'm using my logger. That will write out anyway. So if I do now, instead of print, do logger dot error. I can print that error, and I can do another one where I'm printing out the error message. Now what that should do is give us a little bit more error handling here when we call this. This is going to take a minute. Let me actually do this a little differently this time. I'm gonna pull all of my imports, my scripts, and put them all into Notepad and paste them as one command. That way, when I come, if I have to do this again, I'm not finding all of these individually. So. Copy each of these, paste it in there. White space. Maybe a way better way to do this. Find it, let me know. There's some kind of environment variables we could set up or something along those lines might be helpful as we're debugging these things, but it gets the job done, and sometimes it's what you need to do. Okay, so now if I go all the way back down to the bottom, I can just take the massive copy paste data, enter. Okay, so we're still seeing unprocessable entity, but we should see some more logging entries here. So we're still seeing, there we go. So now we're seeing this, notice we're getting the logging entries now. We're still seeing the invalid requests, and then message SHA weren't supplied. So let me see, let's go back over to the API docs. We updated error handling here a little bit, right? And if we go back into this SHA, the blob SHA of the file being deleted. Okay, so that's interesting. We're going to have to get the SHA of the file being deleted. So we don't have that already. But what we do have is we have we have the file name, so we should be able to get to the SHA. Repository content. Yeah, so we should be able to go and get the path. So we may need to write another method that gets the path. And in our response, we should see a SHA in here somewhere. So there we go. So the SHA is in there, properties, SHA. So we should be able to get to it. It's just a little more complex. And this is why it's helpful to leverage like SDKs, because a lot of this has already been thought through. I'm kind of building this from scratch. A big part of why I'm doing this is I don't want to mess with the pip installs. I don't think we're doing a ton here. I think this is lightweight enough that we can get there in a reasonable amount of time. But when you start looking at more complex scenarios, it probably makes sense to work with the SDKs, the Python SDKs for these endpoints themselves. But this gives us a little bit more control than if we were at somebody else's whims. So let's do delete file, and then we're probably going to do it. Let's do it. Git file. Oops. There we go. Okay, repo full name, path, branch. Let's see, repos, contents, paths, and then we can actually ref it for the branch. Let's just make sure that aligns with our, yeah, the branch was not listed here. Oh, this is all of them. They're all kind of dumped into the same creator update. Repository content. If the content is a directory, the response will be an array of objects, one object for each item in the directory. I wonder if we can commit a directory, because I would prefer to do that. But some of these methods we may still leverage, so I'm going to continue down this road. Let's see, so ref. So name of the commit branch tag. Default repository's default branch. So go back over to ref equals branch. So that should do the trick. This should get us our file contents, and from there we should be able to get the SHA. So what I'll do is, as part of the delete file, I'll actually go out and get that file, grab the SHA from it. Let's do that. Yeah. Full name, path, branch. We're going to get file contents, and then I don't think this is going to work here, because we're getting the contents. We're looking for SHA. Are we getting the file contents though? That's not actually the file contents. Repository content. Okay, so I'm going to change it up a little bit. So get file contents, get repository content. That should do that. So that will give us get repository content. And then I mentioned this actually, is this an array? This is, so if it's not an array because we're targeting a single file, but it does say here, if the target is a directory, we'll return an array. So anyway, we're looking for properties. Don't know if this is the right one yet, but we'll see. Properties, properties, SHA. I think we need the file SHA and not the commit SHA, and I think that's where we're at here. So these are the file properties. These are the commit properties. So I'm pretty sure we need the file SHA, and that's what our error was telling us. Lob SHA file being replaced. So we do need to get a SHA for the file if we're replacing it as well. So this will be able to reuse this get SHA for file method here with others. So get SHA for file contents, and then it's going to be properties. Properties, SHA. Just verify one last time. Properties. Actually, properties, content, properties. That's why we double check. Now I'm happy that we stored all of that information. So I'm going to copy and paste everything without the response to start. There's our data to load things. I do want to try and get the SHA for file first. So let's do github.get SHA for file and repo. We're just going to leave the branch empty because main's perfectly fine for our purposes here. So that's all right. But what we can do is we can go back and get the contents here. We have all of this information. So there's our contents. So that's interesting. That looks different than what the, yeah, that looks way different than what we were told. So anyway, it's just SHA at the root, which is perfectly fine. Contents, SHA. There we go. There's our SHA. What's interesting is there's not any information on commit or anything like that from that call, which it seemed to insinuate that would have been included, but that's fine. That's what we need. So get repository content. We're just going to return SHA from here. Now I'm almost a little curious, and I'm going to try this real quick. I want to do repo control instead of path. What we have our path is just test commit. I'm going to do the whole test commit directory. Let's see what that looks like. So notice it's an array. So what we don't want to do is, I wonder if we do test commit without this trailing slash, if that'll do anything. Still an array. So if this is an array, we probably don't want to, we probably want to fail this. So if this list, I don't want to get, I don't want to do that. I want to array. Just put some additional error handling in here. There we go. So telling us exactly what we want to see. So a little bit of error handling there just to kind of protect us as we go through these and try and predict what we're going to see when we do error handling. So we have the git shopper file, we have the git repository content. Now what we can do when we go to delete that file now is we can use this git shopper file. Actually, I'm going to let this do it, but delete file. So we're going to have to pass in a SHA. And that SHA goes as part of the data that's getting passed in. I believe it is. Delete a file. SHA. So it's its own piece of data. So I'm going to pass this in and do SHA. Self.get SHA for file, repo full name, path, and branch. We have all of that information. So we should be good to go ahead and delete file now. What I find interesting is I wonder if this can delete the directory as well. Could be an interesting. I also don't know if maybe the create or update file contents would allow us to update or upload an entire directory, which would be cool because that would help with what we're trying to get to. But we'll kind of test through those and see how this works. So let's save all. I want to make sure that the delete is working for a single file, then we'll roll it into a multiple file use case. Okay, so here's our seed data. We're going to go in, we're going to try and just delete the file and see if it works. Let's see what issue we're getting now. Message, SHA weren't supplied. Okay, so delete file. This is a way to print the data. Okay, seed data. Then we're going to go to our delete function. Cross our fingers, and hopefully at least prints the SHA in that. Yeah, so here's our data. So here's our message. Here's our branch. Here's our SHA. So we do see a SHA. Maybe that's not the correct SHA though. There were a couple of SHA showing the response payload. So we have our SHA. SHA weren't supplied. Let's go back to our delete method. What else was included in their branch? Branch, SHA, message. So they're all kind of the same thing. The blob SHA. What is a blob SHA? Is that the wrong SHA? Example response. So commit SHA. Payload. Where's my SHA? I don't see, there's a SHA. This is exactly what it should look like. So what's really interesting, we now see Make sure this is what we're passing in data. No, we're not passing in data. There we go. That's the problem. So data, and we come back over to check our delete method, make sure we're asking for data. You don't always need data for a delete. So I'm going to make sure that it's included here. This can do the trick. I hope. Okay, see data. And let's try the delete. So the SHA wasn't supplied again, which is really interesting. We're passing the data in. Delete. Oh, I'm not calling it. That's again my fault. Data equals data. So we weren't getting the SHA passed in because data wasn't funneling through the delete method. All right. Hey, all right. So it worked. Look at that. It's coming from there. I assume that there's. We could put other logs in here, especially like for delete files. Maybe that's something we want to track. I'm not going to do that quite yet, but let's go over and verify that that did work. So repository contents go back into test commit. So it looks like the test commit path is no longer there. So I think that's a good sign. So let's go. CloudBolt samples. Yeah, I got rid of the directory and everything. So I think that's only because there wasn't anything else in the directory. Why don't we, I'm going to try and commit another one. So we have most of our seed data already. The other thing we need, let's do update file contents. We also need content, which I didn't do yet. So content equals file content. And then I think that's all we need, right? We have our repo full name, path, have our content, user. We have all of the other data we need for this. So let's do response equals okay. So we should now see that test repo is back. Should see it. Actually, we didn't check the commits before. Yeah, so it looks like that is working. So we can see who's the user that's making it, all of those things, and then if you go into the commit below, it's showing the additional data. The test commit, here we go. This is where it's coming from. Here's our hello world. I'm going to add another file here. Let's see if this gets deleted if we go through delete things. The directory gets deleted. Okay, so now I have a new file, test.txt. I don't want this to get deleted when we delete the file, though. I don't want it to pull the whole directory. I just want. Okay, so that makes sense. Test commit. There we go. So because that directory was empty, it was getting rid of it before. So this is behaving the way that I would expect it to behave. The other thing I'm going to do again real quick is I do want to try one more thing, create or update file content. I'm going to recreate my file. So just make sure that's showing up. There it is, hello world.py. And then what I'm going to do is I want to change my path to just test commit. So I'm going to do path instead of hello world.py. I want to do test commit, and I want to see if I can get the entire directory. It may not work because of the SHA, but we're going to give it a shot. I think we need a SHA for that. So let's try it. Yeah, so it's not allowing me because that test commit is a directory. And I think what we want to do here, I'm going to try this. I'm going to do, I want to see what this looks like. So the self, I need GitHub. Branch equals. And contents. Okay, so this is the contents of this is an array inside of the directory. So if I were to delete this directory, how do I get a SHA each of those files if I wanted to do that? I could loop through all of the files. I don't like that. I think the API allows for something a little differently. When we're looking at delete file, let's see, path. Nice if it told us a little more about path. File being deleted. So I'm guessing maybe we do have to loop through. This is just a string. If this were, it would accept an array. I could pass an array of the SHAs in. Delete a file. Additional committer, author section, values for name and email, author or committer. 422 is apparently their favorite error code. You see endpoint contents. Yeah, so I think we're good. We'll probably, if we wanted to delete a directory, basically what we could do is construct another one that would then loop through each of the files and delete them all independently, individually. So I think we're good for now. We're going to go ahead and pause. We've gotten a lot covered here. We're now creating files in our repo. We're not calling it from CloudBolt yet. We're just kind of structuring things. But I'm going to go ahead and stop recording now. And thanks for watching.